So I think that Riot, in conjunction with other things they have brought into the LCS and improved over the years, and I have to say, despite how very critical I was in the early days when I thought they had a bad playoff format and they hadn't put a lot of emphasis into people who actually had history running esports tournaments and therefore knew what good tournament formats are and what encouraged good play, I do think over the years, they've done a pretty good job of changing formats, adding in awards, celebrating people, as I mentioned with the whole Bjergsen thing, celebrating multiple champions of the league. I think they've actually gotten better and better as every split goes on. So another thing I would like them to do, in line with how some traditional sports are treated, is to create an LCS Play-off MVP award. Now, you might think, wait a minute, they've already got an MVP award, haven't they? No, they have an MVP award for the regular split, which is great. They should have that of its own accord. In that case, someone, as you saw over in LCK famously, Duke at one point in time was the MVP, despite the fact his team had no chance to go deep in the playoffs. Love that. Means he can be the MVP for just regular split performance. They also, in the last couple of years, introduced I think it was just the last few years, introduced the finals awards. Actually, they might have had that for a while. So they've got one for just the finals as well. So similar to the NBA or the NFL there, where they have the Super Bowl MVP and they have the NBA Finals MVP. But they don't have one for the whole playoffs. Now, first of all, the reason why MVPs are, in my opinion, so most valuable player awards are very important, and I always encourage them and try, if they're not official, to give out my own unofficial ones, is because what's great about them in team games is they allow you to have an individual rewarded for his excellence as an individual player, all he can ultimately control, rather than being rewarded just for team success. So we know that the team who wins the trophy at the end get to be called the best team, and any of the players in that can say, I was on the best team, but were you the best player? Were you the player who performed the best and who was the most important? You can potentially be that without being on the best team. That's one of the things I love about it, because a team might be better than a specific player, but that doesn't mean the players on that team are better than them or performed better. Now, I will just say that as a tangent, this is also why personally I don't like when people vote for the best player on the best team automatically is the MVP. That also doesn't follow, but that is generally the trend a lot of people tend to take, especially in the modern day of both sports like the NBA and in League of Legends, quite frankly. Now, as I said, they already have a regular split MVP, which is great. I think that should be its own domain. I think there should be one for people just from the regular split, because as I say, you might not make the playoffs. If you do, you might not be on one of the best teams, but if you really were outstanding, you deserve to be praised for that and highlighted and get a piece of history and become a part of history. I think that's pretty cool. It encourages people to play their heart out no matter what team they're on. Now, I will say, oftentimes, I do see people confused by this. A lot of people actually, I will see on social media or Reddit, they actually think that when someone has a great performance in the playoffs, so for example, Febervern in the Clutch Gaming TSM series or Reckless during the semifinals, they will say, this makes it clear that he's the MVP. He has to win now. But that's the point. A regular split MVP is its own domain. As soon as the regular split ends and the playoffs begin, none of those games count towards it. It's already an established period, and the MVP is for that period alone. So already I can tell people sort of want playoffs to count for something, but at the moment it doesn't. There's just regular split. That counts for something. You can be the MVP. There's finals. If you're one of the teams that ends in the top two, you can get the MVP for that. You can't get MVP for anything in between. And yet, I think most of us would acknowledge playoff series are pretty important. They're special in your career, whether you're in the first round of the playoffs, the semifinals, or the finals. It's not just the finals that matters. And you can obviously be someone who carries your team all the way to the finals and then maybe isn't the finals MVP and also wasn't the regular split MVP. You're just lost in the middle of nowhere. I think you should be rewarded and you should be praised. It's not a must, but I think it would be cool. So personally, I think playoffs as a whole needs its own. We need to acknowledge that playoffs is the most important phase of the LCS. And so here was the player who over the playoffs was the most impactful, the most valuable to his team, the best, whatever terminology you define as MVP, that's who we want to award here. And that's who we want to celebrate. Because again, just as with regular split MVPs, imagine if when we talk about a great player, we could list off these accomplishments. So when we go to people like Bjergsen, Doublelift, Reckless, Expeke, Perks. We could say, hey, and they've won 3 playoff MVPs. Oh, but there was that one playoff MVP where actually Twch was the MVP, and so Perks wasn't at his best then. It's a great way to define the narrative of their career, to award them, to show that they were on the best team and they were the MVP, or you know what, they were MVP when they lost in the final, but they played so amazingly all the way through and really carried the team, much as Faker, by the way, did when he got SK Telecom to the final of Worlds. Obviously in the final, he was nowhere close to winning MVP, but he was the only reason they even got to that final, quite frankly. So what I love about it as well is it's not just for the champions. This can acknowledge an inspired run. So for example, I think someone like Jensen would already have one of these, even if in the finals, maybe he wasn't always the best player, or maybe it was touch and go, and so he gave it to Bjergsen because TSM won the finals. This would allow, again, excellent star players to win these awards and show off their excellence individually and celebrate it without them having to win and just automatically gain the same kudos. Also, personally, I'm a fan of this sort of award rather than the finals awards. I actually would like it if you had all of them. You just cover all the bases. But if it's a choice between finals awards, which they only have in NBA and NFL, or one for the whole playoffs, I personally would rather have one for the whole playoffs. I think it should have its own in that sense. That's why I'm actually a big fan in hockey of the Conn Smythe, which goes not just to the winner of the final, the MVP of the final, it goes to the player over the whole playoffs who was the most valuable. And hence, there is a better chance in that format for someone who loses the final to win it. It happened in the NBA only once when they did finals only, whether it was Jerry West versus the Celtics, I think. I think it was the Celtics or the Knicks. I think Celtics. But it's happened in the NHL a whole bunch of times that someone who didn't win the NHL Stanley Cup final ended up winning this award. I mean, the most recent one I remember quite vividly, I think it was like 2003 or something. It was when Jean-Sébastien Giguère of the Anaheim Ducks, who was the goalkeeper and who really did stand on his head that whole playoffs. He was the main reason why the Ducks got to the final that year, but they were against the Devils, who had Brodeur, and they had amazing defense. And so the Devils won the series, but Giguère won the actual MVP, the Conn Smythe, which I think is cool. So what I like about this as well is you might actually think to yourself, but it's tough though, right? Because in the LCS, much like the NFL, you don't all start in the first round like you do in the NHL or the NBA. Some people start in the semis. Some people start in the first round, but are going to go out in the semis. Someone starts in the semis and goes to the final. Someone only plays the semis in the third place match. Well, no, that's what's good, is that actually a lot of teams out there, unless you do an amazing run from the first round, they're going to end up playing basically 2 playoff series. They're going to either play the first round, and if they go out there, odds are they're not going to win this playoff award anyway. So they're either going to play the first round, and then odds are they should lose to the team who's seated above them in the semis, so they get 2 playoff series. Or they start in the semis, and they lose there, so they played 1 playoff series, they played the third place game, 2 playoff series. Or they start in the semis, and they go to the final, they've got the semis, and the final, 2 playoff series. So except in scenarios where someone starts in the quarterfinals, goes all the way to the final, therefore they play 3 playoff series, and it turns out that they're just totally amazing, or starts in the playoff, goes to the semis, and then plays the third place game. Except for these sorts of scenarios, actually, that doesn't make sense what I said before. Yeah, you either play the first or you play the semis and the third. The point here is, if you end up playing 3 series, odds are you were one of the MVPs of the tournament anyway, and that you're in prime position to. Then you've got to add in, people are already going to be somewhat biased to performance against the best teams. So having that first round matchup isn't going to help you that much if you get rocked in the final by a much better team, because they probably did amazing in their semi and the final, and people will judge it more according to that. I also think generally it's pretty cool to allow the regular split in the playoffs to be different. That means if someone's amazing at one or the other, they can still win the award. Whereas at the moment, that doesn't allow for it, or their team might not allow for it. Then you've got the scenario where someone might actually be so amazing one split that they win all the awards. They win the regular split award. Fucking hell, they put in effort every game. They were outperforming every game. They get to the playoffs. Amazing run. They win the playoff award. They're in the finals. They dominate the finals. They win the finals award. What an amazing way to show dominance and true excellence, that they won all 3 awards. They swept all 3 awards. I will say, history tends to tell us that people actually, when they know someone's won the regular split, or they know someone won the finals, will probably vote for someone else as the other one, like someone else from their team, or someone else had a great performance, because they'll feel like, but he got a trophy. But in a purist sense, I actually think it's quite cool, the concept you could win all 3 if you really were the Michael Jordan of your sport, the Lionel Messi, whatever it might be, and you were that dominant, people couldn't hold anything against you and they had to just give you all the awards. I also think, finally, a really cool way to implement this would be to do what they sometimes do with playoff awards in other sports, which is that if a legendary playoff performer or champion has either died, or in this case, it's esports, so it's going to mostly be the case, retired. How about give them the name of the award? So instead of it being the EU LCS Playoff Award, why not call it the EU LCS Expeke Award? Then you know what it means. We all know Expeke, one of the best playoff performers ever in the ULCS, even if he dicked around in the regular split. In fact, he's someone who's a perfect example of someone who wouldn't win the regular split MVP, but was a candidate for playoff MVP many times over. Obviously, some of the others we're going to need to retire first. We're going to need Soaz and Reckless and Bjergsen and High and Doublelift to retire before we can put their name on it. But that'll happen, give it in a few years. And therefore, we can also bring up great memories of what they did. And what you accomplished by winning that award is then tied to the greatness of what people like High and Doublelift and Expeke and Soaz were able to do in the place. I think that's also a pretty cool way to do it. And as I say, if sadly one of them ends up dying, even better reason to put their name on the award so we can celebrate who they were even when they're gone, and we can remember that great piece of history, which is often, by the way that they tend to do it in the traditional sports.
Welcome to Thorns and Thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't have any content. The man already speaks, man, but I ain't gonna stop you now. I assume you saw a pretty fucking good video, all right? And you're already on the man's channel. So stay a little while longer. I see you're comfortable. And just check a few more out.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Twch, Sanity, Gman, Kokupsi, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, VeXii, Kevin Haupt, Jason A, and Travis G. Greb. Want to suggest a guest to appear on my show or a topic to discuss? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question. In 2018, for the first time in history, you can directly influence and support my content with the Patreon link below. Unlock the code to the streets and join the Scrilluminati today.